So welcome to both of you to Beyond Four Walls. Thank you so much for being here for a very special educational episode with the DALA group. Welcome Dorian and Ant, if you'd like to introduce yourselves. Dorian, we'll start with you.
Thank you. I'm Dorian Roberts. I'm the chairman of the DALA group and a chartered surveyor and chartered building engineer, looking at exactly how we can enhance the process of building and fire safety moving forward in the industry.
Brilliant. And Ant, what do you do?
So I'm Attree. I'm the Group Managing Director of the DALA Group. We're a group of fire safety and building safety businesses. We've got 3 subsidiaries that operate under the DALA Group. So DALA Surveys, DALA Fire and Risk, and DALA Projects. Business was set up. We've got experience, both myself and Dorian, in the fire safety sector. Business was set up to address problems clients have and how to best deploy our resource to work closely with clients.
Okay. So give me a bit of the background then. What was it that triggered your want to do this? Why did you want to create the DALA group?
So both Dorian and myself worked previously together in the space. We had another business in the sector that we exited early last year, and we grew that to a substantial size. We had about 55 staff, decent sized turnover, and a good client base. But within the sector itself, fire safety, certainly in occupied buildings, covers a vast array of services. From a potential finite amount of resource that the business has access to. And what we found because of that is that we had issues where deploying that resource, there was a lot of conflict with our team to actually deliver those services across the client portfolio. And we were operating under a single entity. So we've taken some time out of the space, and we didn't step away, but we looked at what we did as a business model and how we could do it better.
We could improve efficiencies and make sure that resource was really accurately deployed to get 100% efficiency, not just with the resource, but the process, so that we could provide a better service to our customers, make it faster, quicker, more efficient, very accurate, but also any cost savings that are achieved by doing that, we can then pass on to the end user. We must remember it's a complex sector that we're in. When you look at an RMC, the lessees, managing agent, the freeholder, all of those which have new liabilities under the latest Building Safety Act and leasehold reform. So a complicated sector which we have a wealth of experience in, and we feel that we can offer better clarity to all of those parties involved in that relationship.
Yeah. So the work that you do, is that particularly aimed at the block management sector, or is it a more broader offering?
Mainly at the block management sector, but our customers could be a lessee, normally an RMC or a managing agent or a freeholder, or it could be a pension fund that is financing some of these. It could be an insurance company. So a wealth of different problems in the sector, whether that is undertaking an FRAW, a fire risk assessment, a compartmentation check, a rebuild assessment cost, right the way through to remediation on projects. So every party seems to have a different issue in the sector, but also from the legal side, trying to help our customers understand who is liable, where should they be getting the funds from, and how they unravel the mess that has been created due to old legislation.
Yeah. Yeah. And how have you found things, so you've not long set up the company, but how have you found things post Grenfell, all the legislative changes?
Well, that's a great question. So if we look at, I'll try not to go on too long about it, but if we look at pre-Grenfell, we had the 1984 Building Act making it mandatory to work to building regulations, and the 2005 Fire Safety Order. That was it pretty much. There wasn't much else legislation there for us to work with. Since then, a raft of legislation has come into the industry, from the Fire Safety Act, the Fire Safety England regulations, leasehold reform, the Building Safety Act, and a property manager has to try and understand all of those elements and work with them on what's necessary. So yes, a wealth of of information that needs to be unravelled and explained. And we are massively passionate about explaining that legislation, training, and also making sure that our customers know what their legal liability is, what they need to be doing as a freeholder or as a director of an RMC, making sure that they meet those requirements.
Yeah.
I think it's created some fragmentation as well. So we've been through over the last, we're coming up to 9 years now, aren't we? Post Grenfell, it started with the advice note, then it was the consolidated advice note, PAS, Fire Safety Act, Building Safety Act, and each time the picture has moved ever so slightly. You know, industry is definitely starting to settle down now, and it's better regulated, but it's created its own requirements for reporting. And I think that's something else that we were extremely passionate about when we introduced the DALA group is that real collaborative approach, you know, be it within the group as a whole or within subsidiary to subsidiary, is, you know, Building Safety Act now mentioned structurals. So all of a sudden, you know, external wall is not just external wall anymore. Fire doors got brought into scope as well under the Fire Safety Act. So the door survey piece, the FRA has always been happening since the Fire Safety Order 2005. And it's actually now, you know, if you take each of those activities in isolation, they don't really give you the answer that you're looking for. It's all about proportionality of risk, and actually each of those as an individual entity have a role to play in coordination with the other as well.
And it's joining those together, which is the problem we see in the industry, that you've got to have a fire risk assessor that goes out and does a type 1 fire risk assessment, and they say you need an external wall report. You have to wait 6 weeks to even find someone to get an external wall report. The external wall report says that they need to do other actions, and there might be a structural issue. They might have to put some sort of alarm system in and so on. And it's very fragmented. And we realised that pretty much straight after Grenfell, that the industry was lacking someone to piece all those elements that Ant has mentioned together and operate as one process. So to make sure that we focus on the outcome that's needed, and what do we need to do to achieve that outcome, making the building safe for the most economical, efficient route. Not over-specifying, not under-specifying, getting that risk right and correct. So we realised that and put a process together, and making sure that we have, whether it's a structural engineer, our FRA EW team, which are all employed, our building surveyors, our project managers, our designers, and so on, everyone employed in that process, so we can control that resource and be very efficient with it.
Yeah. And I think that's where property managers struggle, you know, because we've, you know, I've been in the industry nearly 20 years, for example. As you said earlier, pre-Grenfell, it's a completely different landscape to what it is now. And if you've been in the industry for that space of time, to, you know, if you, for example, if you came into it now, this is the norm. What we're
Yes.
having to deal with is the norm.
Yeah.
Whereas if you've been in it a long time,
Yeah.
you know, having to understand and piece together all of that legislation
Very difficult.
quickly as well. And I
Yeah.
remember going to conferences, like I went to one in March, about the year after Grenfell happened, went to one in March, and then by May, everything had changed again.
Yeah.
trying
And
to
that was the
keep
problem with all of that
yeah.
information. As Ant mentioned, you had advice notes 1 to 22. They were only advice notes. Then the consolidated advice note came out, and it went from let's do some of this to let's take everything off, which was the can was completely disproportionate. You have to remove everything that's combustible. Then to bring in the Fire Safety Act, which was an advisory, that was mandatory. Just that part of the information to try and unravel for property managers. And that's where we've done really well to assist the PM in working with all of that process and explaining it as it's come out. We do a CPD for our customers to sort of educate them in what's happened, so you can try and sort of understand the mess that has been created. I think Richard Millett described it in the Grenfell inquiry as a spider's web of blame. So we try and explain that briefly so you can see right where we're going now. But we do benefit now from knowing what you should do to make the building compliant. Our legislation with the Fire Safety Act, Fire Safety England regs, and Building Safety Act is pretty much there. We know what we've got to do. So we're benefiting now from what I describe as a level playing field.
Yeah.
I think the other thing, just just to complicate the situation here as well, though, is that it relies on information that historically has not been passed on. You know, I go back to an FRA. So an FRA should be informed by the building's fire strategy. Who has a fire strategy for a building that they've inherited? You know, it's been developed in 2002. It's gone through 4 or 5 different.
How can you
property
do a fire
management
strategy
companies.
if you don't know how the building is constructed?
Yeah.
You can't do a proper fire strategy. So we try and piece all of that together.
So you've got that legislation that says you need to know this, and all of a sudden you're starting from scratch again. So it is very much a case of like almost where do you start? You've got all this to do, and you know, property managers have an incredibly difficult job because you know, the service charge restrictions that come into play as well. Yeah, we understand why they are being introduced for the right reasons, but you know, a lot of the works that need to happen here for legislation, they are reactive, and you know, financial planning typically don't go hand in hand.
We do
And lease
help.
restrictions as well, because a lease will restrict you upon improvements. And a lot of this will involve improvements to the building. And the lease will say, can't do that, I'm afraid.
And also they need transparency with all of their service charge. So we do help quite a few managing agents put their budget together, but not just to say you need to do an FRAW. What we like to do is explain the origin of why you need to do an FRAW or a type 1 or a compartmentation, or where that's going to lead to with other costs. So we give some origin and some education so that we can help put the budget together. So when they've got to explain it to 200 lessees or an RMC director, they know the history of it. Right, we've got to do that. It's compliant. It's mandatory. It's not down to the managing agent. That's what the law says. So we find that education is the key to all of this, which we, in our previous life at FRC and now with DALA, we are very passionate about educating all of our customers, whoever that may be. So, and obviously we don't charge for that. We're just there to help them and assist them. We do attend resident meetings, again, to try and help. Normally there's quite a bit of friction, especially if you've got a large remediation project. We'll always try and tend to explain how we're going to address it and what timescales to expect. If everyone expects it done in 6 months, that's impossible. It might be over a 2-year period, but to explain the process. Exactly, and what the delays are. And if you think about the whole process with remediation, if you throw out their gateway 2 with the building safety regulator, who thought that would take 25 weeks to get a building regs application through? So we do like to explain everything with a route back to why, and that it is a mandatory or a process requirement.
I think there's always a reason behind everything. Whatever we do, whether that's building safety or the local shop of what you're going to buy in your local supermarket, there's always a reason behind, there's always a why. And being able to explain that and being able to say, well, the reason why we cannot do X, Y, and Z is because legislation states this.
Or the reason we need to do it because we've got
there's going to be a delay because of this.
And
explaining that to people, because at the end of the day, like, we've been speaking about legislation now for the entirety pretty much of this podcast. But there are people behind it. There are people living in these buildings. The property managers are people and humans, you know, who have to deal with this every day.
And we do help those. So those lessees living in the building, we do explain that we are going to take your building and take it from the flat that you're living in, and it will be a building site for a period of time. But this is what we can do to help and assist that. And I think that resident liaison is key. All of the contractors that work for us are very well versed in assisting them making the process happen. We've got to remember that the process only works when we all work together. If we don't work together, it just becomes very, very difficult. So we're very key to the process, and having our own employed resource from end to end for that journey is vital.
Yeah. How are you finding, like, when you're speaking to property managers, and maybe you can answer this, how are you finding the pressure that they're experiencing? How are they portraying that to you?
I think, it's an incredibly good question. I think, you know, what we're finding is it's very much it's all reactive still, you know, and they get pressure from leaseholders. they get pressure from insurers, they get pressure from freeholders, they get pressure from the fire brigade. It is very much pressure driven, and as a result, it's very much it almost lands on us. I need this.
Yeah.
That's it. And for us as a business, it's really important for us to have context still to anything we do. Go back to the fragmentation piece, is that it's a cause and effect scenario that we've been asked to do something, but excuse me, but it might not necessarily be exactly what they need.
Yeah.
It might just be that actually that's the cause that they consider drives the effect. So it's still incredibly difficult for us to get that communication. We still have in the industry, and I think this is not necessarily from the property management sector, that sometimes from the leasehold side, is that it is still a public interest story. It's still regularly in the news. There can be false information presented. We recently had a situation where we got asked to do an EWS1 form off a desktop. That's not acceptable to do for a diligent practice, and it's something we can do. But it's very much, again, we've been asked to do something. We've pulled a price together. We know how to deliver it. And then it's got back to the leaseholders who have said, well, can we just do this? And it's that, and maybe it's a confidence thing with the property manager or the company itself, to actually have the conviction and the understanding to kick back on it, or whether or not they become a conduit of consultant has said X, I've passed the message on to my RTN, my RT, they've come back and said, can we do this? And actually it's just a case of passing the communication back and forth. We, as Dorian said, we take great pride in the education piece of our business. Helping ultimately our clients or the agents that we work with on behalf of their clients to better understand, one, it relieves some stress to them, because actually part of that knowledge and understanding is knowing when they should communicate, or when actually they should say, I've got a trusted partner here that I can quite happily put in front of them at a residence
That's key.
meeting.
Partner is the key. We're not just a firm of consultants. We will partner with the managing agent or the freeholder or whoever the RMC. We will partner with them and help and assist them on that journey. We won't just say legislation says this, you've got to do that. Let's discuss it. Let's work it out together, and let's
And that's
explain.
where the education comes in ultimately, though, isn't it? Because if they're saying we need you to do this, it's probably because there's a budgetary issue.
Yeah.
They want the cheapest option to tick that box, as an example. But what's the consequence of that? What is the consequence if you cut a corner in that respect? You provide them with information that isn't accurate. What's the consequence of that down the line?
Massive, and that's proved recently in the industry with a certain fire engineer that was cutting corners and caused many, many issues for everyone. Whether it was the building society lending, whether it was fire safety, whether it's the lessee, whether it's the RMC, massive issues. There's the right price to pay, and that is where we feel for property managers, because they've got to look at value for money. So cheapest isn't always best. It might be in certain instances, but you've got to interrogate those costs and see, why is there a report costing 25,000 and one costing 3,000? What's the right price? What demonstrates best value for money? We're happy to help with that and explain where the costs come from and give us a first principles breakdown of that. But to try and help and educate, but also attending an RMC meeting is something that we like to do, so that we can work with the team of directors to make sure that they're compliant, but understanding where all those costs come from.
Yeah, and I think, funnily enough, there's a big focus in the industry. It's on that note around SCEB, so skills, knowledge, experience, and behaviours. But behaviours for me is the critical one, because actually you can have all the skills, all the knowledge, and all the experience, but if you don't apply the behaviour correctly, it's irrelevant. And actually, there's two sides to this. There is the competency piece, which can be proven, through doing the necessary checks. But how do you adapt, or how do you address the behavioural piece without you know, without having that partnership relationship, that effective communication, that trust in place, you know, it's really that is to me, that's the most important part.
Then you've also got to look at the risk. You know, do we need to remediate everything on the building? So if you're taking that from a fully qualified person and saying, right, no, we need to take everything off, but that might not be the answer. For example, we used to quote, you know, do we need to take 3 square meters of cedar cladding off around a bathroom window on a 3-story brick built building? Probably not. The risk is so low. But if you looked at the consolidated advice note, that would have told you to take everything off. But really, when we're living in the real world, looking at that risk, is that really going to be a risk? If the whole building was covered in cedar cladding, that would be a different risk. So we try and use proportionality to work out exactly what should be done for the right cost, making sure that we get the most efficient solution.
And are you working with insurers as well? Or is it just in terms of
Insurers and brokers?
Yeah,
Yes.
and brokers, you know, from the risk perspective, like,
Yes.
you know, if insurance company, for example, is saying, or a broker is saying, actually, we're not going to insure your building because there's a bit of cladding around the bathroom window,
Or the price is
or
going
the
to go
price
up.
is going to go up 3 times more than what it should be. Are you able to step in at that stage?
And assist and say, look, this is the risk for this, but however, if it's getting remediated, this is going to be reduce the risk and this is how it will work. But also the insurance industry need education as much as other elements of the sector. Property managers, freeholders, we all need education in this. Yeah, we spent a lot of time researching and looking at it, but the insurance sector, we do like to work with them to help their brokers, but also help the risk panel to look at exactly what the cost should be.
Yeah, on the insurance part as well, is you know, fundamental to it is a high quality FRAL. You know, you can't remove combustible materials from a residential building. It's just not possible. You know, so therefore, the presence of combustible materials doesn't necessarily pose an insurable risk, more so than usual. So it's, you know, for us, it's the diligent practice of opening up. So how the team open up on site, the evidence they collect, and it's our engineering function, whereby, you know, not so much how we assess that risk, but how we communicate the assessment of that risk that can be used by the reader in, you know, whatever they need to do with it. So the insurer, the freeholder, the property manager, you know, to have a decent, high quality FRAL report that gives a right level of context.
So we might be able to come up with mitigation methods to reduce the risk. So we might be able to remove certain areas of paneling if it is of high risk and introduce fire breaks. We might be able to introduce temporary alarm systems and so on to help reduce risk. We must remember that the insurance industry, whilst concerned about life and loss of life, are looking at asset loss, and the property management world is looking at safety as well. As total asset loss. So we have to work out that balance between the two risks and what we're actually assessing, but one pretty much goes hand in hand with the other.
But also remembering the people that are living in those buildings who may not feel safe.
Yeah.
And then they don't feel, you know, from a psychological perspective, they don't feel safe because their money is at risk, because their asset is at risk,
100%.
but then also their service charge is escalating because insurance forms the biggest part of your service charge.
And that's why we try to add an element of calm and explain. Once we've got the CSS application or developer pledge in our projects business, we will look at how that process is going to work so that we can, for example, the RICS did a fantastic announcement that if you do have a CSS application, your mortgage provider should treat that as a remediated building. So that helped calm the industry down, but also educating those lessees that are under pressure from financial side, that there is light at the end of the tunnel. Once we've got the remediation process moving, we're out to tender, we've started the design and so on, there is light at the end of the tunnel. And again, just trying to get everyone working together. That is the problem with the process. But once everyone understands that, you know, we are moving it forward and we are part of the solution, there is light there. So
just having the right communication strategy,
100%,
isn't it? Because as
100%.
we've said earlier in the podcast, you know, it's
Yeah.
if you don't communicate the why it doesn't make sense.
Yes.
You know.
Yeah. And timescales is the key one.
Yeah.
It
get this
definitely is communication, because I think building on what Dorian said there is that, you know, the education piece has helped, but as we all know, if you're a leaseholder, that your cost of living is on the increase, your service charge is on the increase. That's not a problem we can solve. But at the same time, if you've got all of those things happening, the last thing you want is to be engaged in a process or be impacted by a process that you don't know what's going on. Like, you don't know when that light is coming at the end of the tunnel. You know, and something that was mentioned earlier, you know, which is incredibly pertinent, you know, the Gateway 2, Gateway 3 from the Building Safety Regulator on the remediation side is, you know, you're building, you're unfortunate in the respect your building needs remediation. It's remediated, it's wrapped in scaffold, it's wrapped in monoflex, you know, your light levels go down, which impact people, you know, from a well-being perspective, it's incredibly important. You know, imagine being in that situation where you have construction workers outside your windows for 9 months, and then all of a sudden it just the site goes quiet. The scaffold doesn't come down, but the site goes quiet. You know, what runs through your mind there? It's like, is it finished? Is it not finished? What, you know, are we almost there? Yeah, absolutely.
Am I remortgaged? And you know, when are we going to be through this journey? So that is key, to look after the people that are living in those buildings, whether it's a lessee or even a tenant. You know, we need to make sure they're looked after. Many years ago, when the process just started, large block of flats in Basingstoke, we attended a resident meeting with a large managing agent, all the lessees, and one of the guys said, "I just don't know what to do." I'm at the mother. He said, "I'm at the end of my tether. I don't know where I am." We've managed to get a building safety fund claim in at the time, and it was just a case of explaining that you've got your claim in. We got a surveyor at the time to go on the portal and check exactly where that was, what had been approved, and yeah, and it really calmed the whole situation down. So it was great to achieve that. But it's just communication. You know, we must make sure we get that over to everyone.
So what do you think is still missing from the industry at the moment?
I'll let you answer that one for the moment. You can start that one.
Oh, crikey! Just one thing. For me personally, my opinion is, you know, a bit of clarity still from the Building Safety Regulator. There's been a lot of communication around building safety cases, building assurance certificates.
What good looks like, I think, is the key element with that building safety case.
Yeah, what good looks like, but also really what the intent of that as a process is. You know, in my opinion, the intent is that it's to create, you know, like an ISO 9001 quality management system, you know, an ISO style building management system, which, you know, a management system in itself acknowledges that nothing is perfect, but it's all about the management piece. And you know, I don't feel like personally that level of engagement is there yet. You know, we've seen it with clients whereby they've actually gone out to substantiate their building safety case and spent even more money on structural assessments, you know, scanning of buildings, fire strategy reports, you know, FRAUs, so on and so forth. And actually, to me, the purpose of the building safety case is that, you know, it's vulnerable in nature, in the respect that I know what I don't have, but I know I don't have it, and I have a plan. And I think that is not what's there at the moment. I think a lot of people have gone out and tried to get everything, you know, at huge expense. And obviously it's gone over to the Building Safety Regulator, and, you know, we are having BACs coming through now, which is great. But I don't feel like that was the intent of the exercise.
Yeah. From my side, I think missing in the industry is still education. We're working with the TPI to provide education sessions as well, so that we still need to educate everyone in the whole process. And that's a lot of different businesses, sectors to educate. So, but we're working well on that, through them all to educate what they need to do and what that drives from that legal requirement.
Yeah. So I think there's confusion might be the wrong word, but I think there's a lot of tech out there, for example, and
Too much tech, I think, out there.
I'm a complete dinosaur with stuff like that, to be fair. So I struggle with the whole, everything has to be on a portal.
Yeah.
It takes the human element out of it a little bit for me.
Yeah.
But what I think we're struggling with a little bit with the tech side is that it's become a very tick box exercise, and like what you said there about everyone's gone out, they think they have found everything. Is that because their tech has told them that, or where's this report, that report, da 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 da, without necessarily looking at the building, looking at it through human eyes, and saying, well, like you just said, do we need that? What's the risk on that? Do we need this bit? What's the insurance company said? And pulling all of that together.
Yeah, living in the real world and getting that information in a real world time frame. Definitely the education, but also looking at risk proportionately, not just saying, right, we've got to do everything on the building now. Let's make sure the building's safe first and foremost for everyone to live in, and then let's look at a structured plan proportionate to the risk in the building of what's going to happen. If you've got a building that has no compartmentation internally and is covered in combustible insulation and combustible cladding, yes, you're going to need to vacate that. But if you've got a building with the top floor with cladding on, can we remove some of that initially to make sure it's safe, and just work with the process? Every building, and we've looked at thousands of buildings in the last 7, 8, 9 years. Let's look at each building individually and work out a structured plan. There's some good funding in place. There's still some holes in funding. I've been campaigning for many years about trying to get a fund for compartmentation internally. I do think that's the next big wave of work that's coming through, looking at compartmentation and how bad it is, but making sure that those blocks of flats are safe initially.
I think that's the really key word you use there, is plan. You go back to your example of a combustible wrapped building with no compartmentation. To rectify both of those issues is a 12-month job plus. 20. So it's not going to happen now. The important part is the plan and how the plan mitigates any potential risks or protects the occupants whilst that plan is coming to fruition. And that, again, with the building safety case scenario, that's the plan. It's the communication of the plan. We don't have this yet. We think we've got a reason that we need to do it because of X, Y, Z, and we will do it. Go back to it. Service charge funds are being scrutinised. It's not a blank checkbook. Ultimately, the costs end up with leaseholders, and it's not a blank checkbook. It should be about proportionality, and people being comfortable in their own home. And that's not just the physical construction of where they live. That is the financial implication as well.
And I think it's understanding where the responsibility lies as well, because you mentioned earlier about the spider web of blame, which doesn't seem to be anyone being blamed, because that person's blaming that person and that person's blaming that person. But for example, if the fire brigade turn up at this imaginary block that we've just made up that's got all the cladding on and there's no compartmentation, fire brigade turn up, they then go to, who do they go to? They go to the managing agent. That managing agent goes to the leaseholders. But who actually pulls that responsibility together? Where does that sit? We spoke earlier about fire doors. Fire doors in this part are the responsibility of, the front doors. Doors are the most part responsibility of the leaseholders. But the fire brigade will put that risk onto the managing agent, who then has to put that risk back onto the owner.
Yes.
Is that something that you help property managers try and navigate?
We will do, yeah. And also with fire doors, you've got the issue of, was it a defect when it was installed, or is it a defect due to misuse? So we will help with all of that process. Yes. It's quite a difficult one to unravel at times, but we've got a great process in place in the business for helping with that. But there are many elements like that within the construction of the building that we have to look at. The one party that you've missed out on that is the council. So the council are now getting involved as well as the fire service. The freeholders under pressure, but now the council are trying to collect data on their buildings to see what they've got. So that's an interesting dynamic. We're very good with the fire service, working with the fire service, and a lot of our team are ex-fire service, so that we will get them to speak to the fire service and try and work out a plan around what should be done over what period of time, and just keep it nice and calm so that we can all work together.
Yeah, and that's my experience within the sector, is the fire service tend to react when they have to, in the respect that, again, to repeat the word plan, if they feel like there's no plan in place, they almost go to the nuclear button.
Yeah.
And that generates a reaction. And what we've always found is that it may not be a plan that they're openly able to be shared immediately, but that doesn't mean there's not a plan in place. And it's how we engage with them. We've worked with many freeholders managing agents over the time, whereby we've actually sat on fire service calls and essentially said, no, there is a plan here. Like we've done this piece of work. I go back to a remediation scenario again. You've got a FRAL that says you need to remediate. That's a 2-3 year process, but it's in
You started it.
it's starting. It's in momentum. And
We've also made the building safe initially. So whether that is taking 5 meters of cladding off for installation of a car park, or like we say, introducing an alarm system, or whatever is needed to make the building safe. So we're very keen to the process, but also working with everyone.
And if you have you worked with managing agents who have had to implement Wake and Watch or anything like that? So that cost
evacuation,
is extortionate, isn't it?
It really is.
And nobody, you need it, because if your building is that unsafe that you need Wake and Watch, that the cost is so high, and that affects people's mental health because of that cost.
And it still amazes me, even at this stage, this far on from Grenfell, we're still finding buildings that need a Wake and Watch. We still haven't looked at all the buildings, all the high-rise, high-risk. So yes, but we are used to working with buildings of that nature. But the idea is then to get rid of the Wake and Watch as quickly as possible and make it a safe environment for the lessees to return or to stay in.
Yeah. And do you work with managing agents who have buildings under 11 meters, because they're also ultimately still at risk, even though legislation isn't concentrating on those smaller buildings as yet, it will come down the line. And going back to the plan, doesn't it? Was what I say to clients that I've worked with in the past, it might not be a high rise, high risk 18 meter building. You might not be in that sort of 11 to 18 meter section.
But it might be a low
rise. It's going to come down the line. You need to think.
And we do work with some fantastic freeholders that are very safety conscious, that want to check all of their stuff. Obviously, they've started with the high rise. They're well through their mid-rise, they're 11 to 18s, but they do have, and there is a lot of blocks out there under 11 meters. So we've come up with a really good system to help that, because we have to look at the cost of those as well. And do we need to do a full FRAW of low-rise buildings? And that's the Fire Safety Act says we need to look at that, but we don't need to do a full FRAW. And the team has devised a great process to help out, make it efficient.
Yeah, I mean, something that's really important there is the Fire Safety Act applies to buildings of over 2 units. So that's 1, 2, 3 stories upwards. So it's actually about that legislation applies to those units regardless. Now, naturally, the higher level buildings, it's not directly related to risk, but it does have an impact. We've been working on, so we do a preliminary review, under the PAS methodology, where essentially you would look at a low-rise block that's had a fire risk assessment, and it said, we're not sure about the external wall makeup here, and we can do a report on that. It's not a full FRAW, it's not anywhere near it, but essentially what it enables the client to do is discharge that element of their liability.
And that comes from a cost point of view as well.
Yeah.
You can't charge a block of 6 flats £10,000 for an FRAW, £5,000 for an FRAW. It needs to be proportionate to risk, and we've come up with a fantastic process for that.
And also that fragmentation piece that we mentioned earlier. So we do that as a service. We also offer as a service a holistic review for lower rise blocks, whereby essentially we said before, you do an FRA, but it's informed by fire strategy. How many blocks have fire strategies? So what we will do is a retrospective fire strategy, an FRA, and the preliminary external wall review in one service. So for blocks that are looking for an FRA to be done, it's come back in cycle. Dorian mentioned it earlier. You get an FRA done and it says you need a FRAW. That goes out of consultant one's control into consultant two. The FRAW or the FRAW should inform the FRA. Now, how often does that happen, that actually a managing agent gets their FRAW done as their FRA has advised, they give it back to the fire risk assessor, and the fire risk assessor addresses it within their fire risk assessment? It doesn't happen. It doesn't happen because, from a property manager's perspective, that's just another task that needs to be done. So, we came up with the idea of actually, why don't we just do everything in one go? More so aimed at the lower rise blocks, because, something I'm completely aware of is the scale of the lower rise stock is massive in comparison to your HRBs or your mid-rise stock, but they have the same issues. All right, they're not as big, and that the risk of those issues is maybe not as has a big an impact, but it's still a legal requirement of ultimately the client to look at stuff like that.
Yeah. And how do you deal with, I've got quite a lot in Cheltenham, for example. There's a lot of much older buildings, probably compartmentation, it doesn't exist in a lot of them. How do you help property managers around dealing with, listed buildings, for example, that were built in the 1800s?
Yeah.
That you maybe a block of 10 or smaller than that, where it's very, everything is very decorative. So if you start pulling things apart,
you can't cut them open and start putting aluminium plates on them and so on. We can do small drill holes, we can do endoscopes and so on, but compartmentation internally, some of the older buildings are actually better than the newer ones because they're masonry internal walls. So it's just where services pass through and so on. So perhaps the remedial works might not be as much or as intrusive. But we will always work with the nature of the building, and if it's listed, if it's old, and so on.
Even put a fire alarm system in, for example.
Very difficult. Very difficult.
And you really don't want, people have bought those properties because of what they look like ultimately.
But there are some good products out there that are wireless, for example. So rather than drilling holes everywhere to put an alarm system in, so there's been some great progress to work with older type buildings, but we must be very considerate on that, though, that we don't want to be drilling massive great holes in listed buildings that are probably mostly masonry anyway. So
yeah, definitely. So as we finish off, is there anything you'd like to add before we finish?
Just really, from my side, just really about how keen we are on the education and trying to help everyone in that process, and the importance of tying the team together, but also understanding the legislation and how things are changing and keeping current with that. We understand that the property manager's job at times is impossible and very difficult at best. So we are there to help and support those property managers on that journey through from the initial report right the way through to completion of the remediation works. And it's an interesting journey. Every building is different. Every lease is different. Every property manager has different problems, different pressures, different lessees living in the building with different requirements. So yeah, we're really keen to help unravel and help on the journey through to make sure the building is safe and compliant.
Yeah, and if a property manager was onboarding a new building, for example, whether that's an older building or newer building or whatever that structure looks like, a lot of property managers, for example, might do a lease review initially. Is it something that you would recommend that they also look at, sending you.
You've got all the information that you've got,
Yeah.
and send it through to us, and we'll produce you a plan of what we think you need to do. So if your FRA is really good, we'll say yes, it's great. If it's got some holes in it, we will point to those and what the next step should be. But we'll plot that journey, but we'll also plot it in line with what you should be doing in accordance with the legislation. So looking at all of that and help with that. I think that gives not just the property manager peace of mind, the RMC, and also the lessees peace of mind that they are going to be compliant, but it might take a year, maybe 2, maybe 3, to make sure that they're in that position. But yeah, there to help and assist. But we're not just a consultant; we are a partner. We do go into managing agents' offices and sit with them for the day and work out what's next, what their problems are, and how we can help with them. So we do like to take on the blocks that are quite difficult as well. So if you've got a block that's really difficult, that needs lots of work, the CSS are struggling with something, the fire engineers have been struggling with it, the property managers are struggling, we'd like to get in there and come up with a solution. So
you're going to be inundated now. You're going to have all these calls saying, please come into my office.
We like a challenge. We do like a challenge, and there's yes out there, I know, but yeah, we do like that. So we like to help and assist through that process. So
well, that's great to know. And I think a lot of the listeners for the podcast as well would be happy to hear that there's a light at the end of their tunnel as well.
Yes, definitely, definitely.
I think just on the, again, on the education isn't just CPD as well. And I think, we're into the space now where, there are the certain core tasks that are easy box ticking. I need a FRAW, you need an FRA. But there's also, we're seeing there's a lot that falls into a gap that isn't a specific task. It's engagement with the fire service, for example. It's getting the output established and then addressing that through the services that we provide. Very much education can just be a phone call. So, if anybody isn't sure how to address a problem, reach out to myself, reach out to the team. We're happy to collaborate because we talked about value for money earlier. If you think a FRAW, for example, solves the problem, you spend that investment on a FRAW, it doesn't solve the problem. It's then the next thing it needs to look at. So, absolutely collaboration. I appreciate it's not always easy to do with the pressures and the time pressures on property managers, but that collaboration early means that we can really make sure that what they need to be completed is completed first time.
And it's working with that budget, making sure that if we've helped put the budget together, or for example, you might have an urgent FRAW, but the managing agent explains that we can't issue any more budgets till any more demands for money until January, and we get asked to do it in September. We work with that. We work with it. We did it a lot in our previous slide to make sure that we could at least start the ball rolling for them to give them certainty. So
and it's letting the leaseholders know in advance then, isn't it? So if you say it's needed in September, this is coming in the budget. They can send out even a guidance note or advice note or something like that. Like, this is what's been recommended. This is what we're going to have to put in the budget from January, and letting people know in advance of when it's coming, rather than
get that nasty shock,
landing it on their doorstep, and then saying, "Oh, the budget's gone up by 10 grand." Why?
But also supporting the PM in that explanation, so and assisting with that. So
Okay, great. Thank you so much for your time.
Well, thank you for having us.
Of course.
Thank you.